We will surpass the hard time together like we always do. So, once again, welcoming all of this wonderful initiative to share knowledge. We welcome here our the most valuable medical fraternity present with us tonight for our program. And we thank you wholeheartedly to show your gracious presence. This program is one of its kind coming from Center Pharmaceuticals, and definitely we will see more such events in our near future. Tonight, there shall be an insight on one interesting topic, that is journey to the west and back. From the top line, it reminds me one of the most influencing freedom fighter. Who was that? Rishi Aurobindo. Yes. So Rishi Aurobindo studied at King's College, Cambridge. That's there in England. He learned the philosophy of multiple Western countries, internalized the concept, and later on developed a new path called integral yoga psychology. A new path for the upliftment of mind in Indian perspective of religion at heart. Not taking much time, I'm handing over the session to one known face in Indian medical fraternity in psychiatric therapy, Dr. Bhalchandra Kalmik. Dr. Bhalchandra Kalmik is medical director and chief psychiatric at Nirman Psychiatric Nursing, Rehabilitation and De-Addiction Center at Pune. So I welcome Dr. Kalmik sir. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I welcome you all to the webinar series that is Pulse of Wisdom, organized by PPA and IPS Pune branch. Today we have a senior speaker, Dr. Vinod Chaugule, who will be talking on his experiences in UK and in India. For this session, we have our own moderators, that is Dr. Jyoti Prakash and Dr. Bhushan Shukla. Shruti, please project the slides. Yeah. Dr. Jyoti Prakash doesn't need any introduction. He is a professor of psychiatry at FMC Medical College, Pune. He is the teacher from UG as well as PG, examiner from various universities. He has more than 100 publications in his credit and 5 chapters in various textbooks. He has various awards in his credits also. At present, he is the president of Indian Psychiatric Society Pune branch. At present, he is editor-in-chief of Indian Psychiatric Journal, Industrial Psychiatry Journal, BSL, ACLS instructor, American Heart Association, and assessor NABH, faculty NMNC Regional Center Pune, National Advisory Board member, Psychiatry and Webinar Coordinator, NBE. And his extracurricular interests are psychodrama modules, creative writing, and clinical research. Our second moderator is Dr. Bhushan Shukla. He is from Pune only, MBBS, MD, DNB, MRCP Psychiatry, well-known child and adolescent psychiatrist from Pune. Trained in psychiatry in India as well as in UK. He is a member of ethical committee at various centers. He is setting up and running a child guidance clinic in Pune. His well-known show, that is No Go Tell, was presented in Amir Khan show, that is Satyamev Jayate. He has written a book titled Affective Disorder Handbook of Psychiatry in South Asian Perspective in 2014. Expert in various psychotherapy modalities and presented his work in various state level conferences and abroad. Writer on DNA weekly column and has a well recognized blog on child psychiatry. Now I hand over session to Dr. Jyoti Prakash for further proceedings.
Thank you, Dr. Kalmek. Good evening, everybody. I heartily welcome you all for this pearl of wisdom. And we are going to be enthralled by yet another eminent psychiatrist today with yet another pearl. And the psychiatrist today is Dr. Vinod Chaugule. Can I have his slide, please? If you see, his life is what probably most Indian psychiatrists would have dreamt of. A very optimal mix of national and the international, academics and the clinical, government and the private, child on one side and the old age on another, rural and the urban. He is an alumni of BJ Medical College. Subsequently, he went ahead to head the department at KEMH, which is yet another prominent institute in Pune. He had been instrumental in designing a lot of activities for PG teaching as well as rural psychiatric services. He subsequently went to have a test of UK and the practice there. He held a position of consultant in general adult psychiatry and advanced further in his educational role in UK as a college tutor with another 6 years. He added much more credit to his academic degree by doing certificate course for clinical education and leadership with a purpose. He introduced concept of neuromodulation and has been actively involved in this with accreditation for last many years. He has undertaken many research projects and activities, developed models for patient care, and working on emotional intelligence and positive psychology activities. To see overall, he is probably Shah Rukh Khan of our psychiatry today, who has a stint of both Pradesh and the Swadesh. With this, I like to hand over the mic to our eminent speaker, Dr. Vinod Chaugule, please.
Thank you so much. Am I audible enough?
Yes, sir.
Good.
Yes.
Right at the outset, let me say that I'm really overwhelmed by the kind words that you all have showered. I really feel overwhelmed. I hope that the presentation will be enjoyable and it will fire up a good bit of productive, useful discussion. Let me also thank the organizers, in particular Dr. Kalmeg, for his kind invitation and his suggestion of the topic too. I also thank the IPS Pune branch and PPA, and of course the Centaur pharmaceuticals and marketing team. It's really great to be here. It's a pleasure. It's a topic of my personal experience. So I'll be talking to you about something which is personal, but within the boundary of remaining professional. But equally, I think it should be revealing about myself, my journey. I call it a journey because it was really indeed a long term of changing experiences from one world to the other. It all began as a dream. We'll go on to the first slide. Can we do that, please? How did it begin? Obviously, this is very personal to me. It was my father's legacy. He wished I should have the experience in the West, but that was not to be possible till late stage of my life, at the age of 55, when I left for UK. The dream that he started was really fired up by the kinds of literature that we went through for preparing for our MDs and DPMs and so on and so forth. They were all Western textbooks. I also was fortunate enough in going all over the world because of my contacts with different countries' consulates who would request me to escort their psychologically disturbed patients, etc. And that gave an opportunity, although it was a very short-lived opportunity each time, it was just a cross-sectional one, to see how the emergency patients are received by them, treated by them, etc. So there were those opportunities which kindled further my curiosity. But the real opportunity came at the age of 55. That's rather unusual, isn't it? I'm sure people go abroad for professional reasons at a much earlier age. Shall we go on to the next one? The next slide, please. So you are listening to an unusual person who went abroad at the mature, so-called mature age of 55. Am I audible, please?
Yes, sir, you are audible, sir.
Okay, good, good. The opportunity got fructified at that age when the UK systems, the NHS, which provides services to the whole of UK, they, in response to the felt need for professionals, they started inviting people from world over. And it was a little difficult to resist that temptation because of the inherent dream that one had. They were all red carpet offers. And the one I chose was the one which had beauty of nature, Yorkshire, North Yorkshire moors, as they are called, one of the most beautiful places in UK, seashore being at just 15 minutes distance. So in addition to entering into a large mental health trust, which was growing at the time, I felt it was an opportunity for me also to grow in many different ways. They almost bent over backwards in offering all kinds of flexibilities in the job. So while all of this was attractive on the one hand, there was something else which tended to hold me back. My own folks, my friends, my seniors, my relatives. And it might be interesting for you to hear that one of my relatives who is in UK, who's a doctor, he's not a psychiatrist, but he told me, Vinod, I have diagnosed you as having middle life crisis. That was quite a interesting thing to hear. And it made me a little sober towards this whole dream. But nevertheless, I weighed the pros and cons and decided that there were more positives to it. My curiosity wouldn't let me remain quiet. And I made it to the West. Can we go on to the next one, please? You might be wondering, looking at this word, Zeitgeist, why have I chosen this kind of a complicated word? Zeitgeist is a system of thoughts and beliefs, to make it simple, which exists over an epoch or a length of time in any community in the world. So the people in that context of thoughts and beliefs at that time in the evolution of the community, they are all influenced by that culture, by that society, by the prevailing norms, systems, values, etc. And that is a Zeitgeist. I am focusing slightly onto the roles that I had in India, which have been highlighted earlier on in the CV, and you know about it. But this is just to let you know that that was the environment I grew up. That was an environment with a huge amount of freedom. We had passion, we had commitment, we had dreams, local dreams for bringing up our departments wherever we worked to a level of recognition and repute. And I was fortunate having wonderful colleagues, especially one who's already here, Professor Dr. Mohan Agashe. And I think we enjoyed those times, but equally, there was this private practice and the freedom to go almost unregulated with minimum structure for training yourself and the students. Whatever we thought was good for the students, we did it. Students may have been benefited. Students do say, I'm lucky enough to have that kind of feedback too. But equally, the point I'm trying to emphasize here in this Zeitgeist 1 is the Indian context where I grew up. I am juxtaposing this to the Zeitgeist 2, which we'll come to a little later on. How it feels to go into a different professional culture and be exposed to all kinds of frameworks, protocols, rules, laws, regulations, governance, etc., etc. I really felt that being in India in that era we really had almost unbridled freedom. We had our own sense of responsibility. There was very little to really regulate us the way it exists elsewhere. Let's go on to the next one. Our patients, we are all aware how they worship us when we give them good results and we establish a good deal of rapport and authoritative knowledge in delivering the care to them. But equally, that power, I think, needs to be looked at rather carefully. As I said, we had the unbridled freedom to experiment with therapies. There were no protocols or guidelines in those times, which are now coming in gradually. We have guidelines for OCD, we have guidelines for treating psychosis, this, that, and the other. At that time, there were no explicit standards really to refer to. We had limited insights about what was happening elsewhere in the world through whatever we happened to read, whatever our institutions provided us access to. And interestingly, we ended up in a groupthink. Groupthink is a concept worth elaborating a little bit. It is a situation where like-minded professionals get together, they reinforce each other's views in a positive way and get into a kind of a bubble of beliefs that whatever they are doing is good, is useful, not harmful. Yeah, so it was a kind of an internal regulatory system we all had. And we ended up experimenting different kinds of therapies. Mind you, we had our own consciences with ourselves. We had our own peer group, which was not called formally as a peer group, but we had good colleagues, as I said. We had interesting students who would challenge us with questions, this, that, and the other. So that was a stimulating environment. But in terms of explicit standards, there was a paucity now that I look back and think of. Can we go on to the next one, please? Now, when I'm talking like this about my personal experience and my personal perceptions, let's say, I have to make it very clear that this presentation is not a comparison across different cultures or systems or countries to criticize any one of them. And that's why I use the word Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist means, as I said, a belief and thought system which prevails at a particular time of the evolution of an institution, of a society, etc., etc. This is also not a forum for airing one's political views in the sense of wanting to canvass one system over the other. It's very tempting sometimes. We all are humans and we get into that kind of a trap. This presentation is certainly not that kind of a presentation. Nor is this a very systematic and exhaustive study. As I said, this has a personal facet, personal dimension to it. But then what is this? What this presentation is about? We'll go on to the next one. It's a personal narrative based on an experience which stretched over 13, 14 years, sufficiently long. And I was fortunate that the brain was intact all over throughout those years to absorb the impressions, good and bad, and accommodate, adjust, and thrive in that environment. This is a personal view of the professional, academic, and research world of the West. When I say West, I, of course, predominantly include UK, where my consultant role was. But equally, we had the opportunity to visit the US and interact with world-renowned celebrities in our profession, celebrities in the academics and research in places like Stanford and Harvard, all through because of the curiosity. I feel that this presentation could possibly give an opportunity to reflect on what we do once we are through the whole presentation. being able to reflect is one of the best attributes that we have, don't we, as psychiatrists and as therapists, and as, of course, intelligent, matured human beings. It will also be an opportunity, possibly, for accommodating or adapting to the new incoming systems of guidelines. I'm sure our students will agree that the IPS is coming out with different kinds of guidelines. We have the Mental Health Care Act framework. I'm fully aware of the limitations, the practical reality limitations that we are all going through in relation to that. And of course, we will be all faced with the societal needs and demands from the healthcare point of view in our own country. So I think there is an opportunity to have a fruitful discussion after this presentation. Shall we go on to the next one, please? It'll be useful to have a quick look at the scenario in UK at the time that I went there. You know, when they advertised and they examined or assessed our own track record, it was pretty rigorous. And it was so because the UK systems were aware that they were casting their net across the globe, and there'll be different kinds of competencies in different countries. So NHS was found to be, according to me, a very responsive system, responding to the shortages of medical manpower, evolving standards of care, and also medical education. There was at that time something important that was happening. The government was, the health department of the government was entrusting a lot of responsibility and power to the individual trusts. To give you a quick idea as to the NHS, it's a system which governs the whole of the country. It's a system which is run practically on the ground by the health trusts. Mine was a mental health trust attached to two universities, Newcastle and Durham. Those trusts were now to be called as foundation trusts. What it meant was that the trusts who would employ 100 or 200 consultants and 5,000, 6,000 manpower in the health sector for delivering service to that locality, they had more autonomy in decision making, which they didn't have before. But at the same time, with this freedom that they got and the autonomy that they got, they were still being astutely regulated, mind you, by the General Medical Council through their protocols and their rules, regulations, etc., and the medical royal colleges. They did not let go of their influence in terms of shaping the quality, the standards, etc. So that was the scenario where it was a different universe, which itself was in transition. We'll come to know how it transited to a new system a little later. Next one, please. What one was struck with once one landed into that role as a consultant was the immense value that they have in the core values which govern the health service delivery, the educational system, and everything that goes with it, including the research. There are certain core values that one gets impressed with. Everywhere there was this phrase, good governance, which meant running a system in a way that will be outcomes oriented. It will deliver good outcomes. It will deliver good outcomes to the satisfaction of the customers, let's say, if we call the service users or patients as customers, to the students in the educational sector, everywhere, and the society in general too. So every level, sorry, is that something for me?
No, sir, it
I
was one
believe.
of us. I muted him.
Oh,
You
okay.
can please continue.
Sorry. There was this principle of good governance, which is really wonderful because it ensures, if you follow all those principles, it ensures that the system runs fairly, effectively, efficiently, and satisfactorily. We'll come to the details of it a little further ahead. There was explicit accountability in every role from bottom upwards, right from the nurses and even the janitors to the CEO and the chairman or chairwomen of the trust. There was explicit role responsibilities spelled out for every role. As a consultant, when you're appointed, you get the job plan, you get the appointment order, you get the framework of the functioning of the trust, etc. Responsibility, 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 explicitly spelled out. So there is no question of any kind of flexibility there in terms of the core principles. Next point is the explicit outcomes-based performance evaluation. How good you are is decided not just by the feedback from the students or from your colleagues, but also from the service point of view, what the customers or the service users say. How many patients do you get them to be well enough or recovered enough within certain standard definitions? How much you as a consultant, mind you, a consultant is always considered as the top man in terms of responsibility, in terms of even pay scales. I mean, to be on the lighter side of the things. But in terms of the responsibility, it is a heavy one where you are judged by the outcomes. And of course, how does one achieve all this? Not just all by yourself. You are individually supervised by your superiors, by your managers, medical managers, doctors, whatever. And there are processes and systems in place which allow that supervision to take place in a very defined way, in a time-bound way, and in a way which is recorded. And all of that is taken into account at the end of the year when the performance of the doctor is assessed. And that is the yearly appraisal system. That appraisal everyone has to undergo. There are systems for that. There are protocols for that. There are methods for that. And there are people with dedicated roles for the appraisal. So even the chief executive and even the chairman is appraised every year. Shall we go on to the next one? How does one achieve all that we saw so far? I felt, this is my individual opinion, the concept of lifelong learning is very vital. I mean, in a lighter vein, I would say, I had colleagues saying that, yeah, once I do my MS, MD or whatever, I don't need to really read the books because I'm good, I'm giving good results. And that's a pat on your own back given by yourself. Well, those things do not exist anymore. Every role, be it a consultant role, a student role, or a registrar's role, every role has to evolve towards something better, a higher level of competence. And the vital principle, which I'm sure most of you might be aware of, it's David Kolb's experiential learning cycle. That principle was employed in perpetuity. Every year there would be programs which we all would be exposed to this kind of learning with demonstrations. The essentials of Kolb's learning are that one learns only by experience. But is that sufficient? No. The experience needs to be reflected on. The experience needs to be weighed, balanced, discussed, and then implemented into certain action points. What's the use of having immense knowledge, but without having any kind of, action points which are deliverable, which can be evidenced, and which result into good outcomes? So those action points were very vital in this learning. If the outcomes were good, obviously the learning cycle was complete in a favorable way. So then you go on to the next skill that you want to learn, next knowledge base that you want to absorb, next competence that you want to absorb. And we will come to that a little later in terms of how a doctor can evolve in that system. And all of this learning is encouraged by very effective feedback process in place at all the levels. I keep telling my colleagues and students where I go and teach that there is no learning without feedback. I felt that the feedback that was given in the systems where I worked was immensely useful. But mind you, the feedback can be negative, and a negative feedback is a better one to work on so that you improve. There's no point in having only a good feedback, a solicited one. That means you ask for it, and then you give a pat on your back that all my colleagues and friends and team members, they said that I'm great. No way. There is a system of effective feedback with certain kinds of rules, and those rules have been evolved after research. They are called Pendleton rules. We won't go into the details of that. Okay, so effective feedback, basic learning principles, and the learning is guided under supervisory framework. So every medic, every non-medic will have a supervisor who is more experienced, more learned perhaps, and who knows the skills as to how to supervise. That would be done regularly. And last but not the least important is the 360-degree feedback, which was incorporated into the appraisal every year. I think this 360-degree feedback concept is really useful in that particular system, because the feedback is collected not from just your colleagues, not just from your students, not from your managers alone, not from the nurses, not from psychologists, but everyone that you nominate. And that feedback goes through a system of assessment in the Royal College. And all of that is fed back to you. That gives you an idea as to where you stand in terms of the whole nation, because they have the database in terms of competencies and in terms of whatever feedback that has been received. The feedback is used constructively. You know, feedback can be very critical and harmful too if you mismanage it. So that's for lifelong learning. I suppose that's a vital principle which all of us need to really assimilate within us. Without that, we are not doing justice to our roles and expectations from the society, etc., etc. Right. So when you do all those things, what happens to your career? Are you stagnant? Do you progress? Yes, you do progress, because there are incentives in the system built in. So some of them are like, they're called clinical excellence awards. I was lucky enough to get a few of them. They are monetary, and that's why the value is obviously more. And they are there for lifelong. At least that was the system then. But now I suspect, it's possible the NHS faced the financial crunch along with the rest of the nation. And that probably had a knock-on effect on the way the clinical excellence awards were configured. But yes, the key point is that we are all, I would say, personalities who are attracted towards a reward, and that too a concrete one. How does one progress then in the career? Through the medium of PDP, which is Personal Development Plan. We are trying to bring it in at the place, at the college where I'm teaching, for the students to bring in that concept and to see if it takes good roots and it benefits. So far, the feedback is good. The PDP means it's a plan that your supervisor and yourself, you may be a consultant, you may be a student, you may be a registrar, you may be a nurse, an OT or whatever, but your growth is defined by both of you. the supervisor and yourself, and those action points as to what to do to achieve those goals, they are spelled out. And for example, I led a team of ECT workers. There were managers, there were nurses, there were students, registrars, etc. Now, my interest naturally is in trying to excel in that role as the lead consultant for ECT and neuromodulation. Neuromodulation was a concept which I tried to bring in, but that was towards the close of my career over there, and I had to return, so I could not take it further. But the point I'm trying to make is, when that was there in my plan, the trust would support me. The Royal College also would support me, even financially, to be able to attend the programs, to go through those skill sets, to learn. Traveling expenses and staying expenses apart, everything was supported. But then at the end of it all, of course, you had to do your own reflections and prove that it was well worth the investment by the trust and the Royal College. So there is a system of providing motivations or incentives or whatever you want to call it. You are driven, you remain driven. Of course, then there is this system of CPD. We are all familiar with. We have that system here. But the CPD system worked pretty differently over there. Every year, there were plans for CPD for every professional, and they were supported by the trust, and they were the outcomes of that program, learning program, they were assessed and judgments made. The bottom line was that you needed to prove that you're good to continue. This would happen year after year. But then by the time I left, there was this new system which the General Medical Council brought in, and that is the concept of revalidation. So your license to practice would be continued at the end of 5 years, provided your CPD and your PDP and your feedbacks and everything was collated, and it gave a clear indication that you have improved. Without that, the progression could be halted. Sounds horrible, isn't it? I think that there were times when we all went through a psychological distressed state in terms of trying to prove. Mind you, at an emotional level, it is not necessarily healthy unless you take special measures to address your own distresses, which we'll come to a little later. Okay, next one, please. Do doctors go into management? Meaning, do doctors do only clinical work and they are excellent there and they can't manage the leadership roles or service delivery? They can't manage the finances of the trust? No, there are some of us who have that basic inclination. Some of us would have the ambition and the willingness to further progress, because by becoming a manager of doctors, you get to control the workforce in a much better way, to deliver results in a much better way. But then, mind you, it is not just the doctors who were at the helm of affairs. There were psychologists, excellent ones, social workers, again, excellent ones, occupational therapists, pharmacists, all had the opportunity to become managers even to the medics, consultants like me. So it might sound very strange and weird as to how a psychologist would be a manager or a supervisor for a doctor. What do they know of medicines? What do they know of neurology? What do they know of neurotransmitters, this, that, and the other? But then, well, there is that system which allows this kind of a democratic process of choices to become more senior, more in authority, more in competence. For this, there is a system of leadership and management skill development. Our trust had that system going on every year, and I'm sure all over the UK it would be so. One small point I wanted to make. Does a doctor do all this outcomes business alone? No way. It is this concept of MDT, multidisciplinary team, which is very vital. Where, let's say, I am a consultant to a particular locality for managing the psychotic disorders or affective disorders. I will have a team of nurses, psychologists, OTs, pharmacists, managers, etc., etc. And I would be the leader. But I won't have the same kind of authority that I had here when I was the boss. As I told you, the unbridled freedom that one had got curtailed as a result of the MDT functioning MDT system there. Every member of the team contributes to decision making. Every member is an expert, a learned person. Most of them. You could have an odd man, odd person out who is not good or competent enough and who can be a problem. But then there were ways to manage it. Next one, please. It will be now interesting at this stage to look at the human rights situation, particularly in terms of mental health. And I'm sure the Mental Health Care Act India is bringing that concept, has brought that concept actually into reality, where the human rights of our patients needed to be looked into in much more depth and detail and with a greater sense of responsibility. The Mental Health Act England, from where I suppose we have modeled our own, and we are still evolving. Mental Health Act is something which is taken extremely seriously. It is a mandatory part of our training as a consultant, even as a registrar, and even others like social workers and psychologists. There will be regular and rigorous legal challenges in day-to-day practice because patients needed to be admitted. And you are all aware, not all want to be admitted because of their psychopathology or whatever. And then there comes to be a tussle, a conflict. The doctor wants the patient to be admitted for covering the risks. But in that process, it should never, never, never happen that you are using your authority as a professional unchallenged. Your authority needs to be challenged, has to be challenged, and that was challenged on a day-to-day basis. The moment a person would get admitted there in a psychotic state, not willing to get admitted, requiring sometimes even restraints or injections, this, that, and the other, ECTs sometimes, the Mental Health Act process would be triggered. And that really benefited us as individual doctors, because then we started thinking more deeply of how human rights violations can very easily take place without even our being aware of it, let alone the patient. There was very little scope hence for any kinds of violation of human rights of our patients over there. They would still occur. There would be challenges, and the challenges I would elaborate a little bit. They're quite interesting. Next slide, please. There were other areas where the trust would all the time want everyone to improve the service, to improve the quality of the service enough so that the outcomes were very good. The untoward incidents were not happening. All laudable goals, but we know our science is not perfect. We are not perfect. Patients are not perfect. So there is a scope for mishaps left, right, and center. So the principle which prevailed towards the latter part of my career was the quality improvement systems, QIS. We all were to undergo the training every year, and that was called Toyota model. we used to wonder, how can a model called Toyota model meant for cars, for the business of cars, how would that be applicable to human beings? Human beings are not like cars. But then, mind you, it was brought in, ushered in with a huge amount of training and expectation to improve the quality of our service. And it was a continuous process. The process would comprise of what is called as the Kaizen events. These are all Japanese words, obviously. Kaizen events would be the ones where the team members would join up, would discuss areas for improvement in terms of specifics, which are given a little below. That's called lean thinking. You need to remove waste wherever there is. Any member of the team could raise the issue if they feel that money is being wasted over certain kinds of activities, etc. Remove time wasted. Everything needs to be more efficient in terms of time. Customer satisfaction, kind of feedback, the way the population assessed, in a way, the trust's performance. The teams were almost compelled to participate, because I think with that kind of an active participation in the deliberations of where the problems are and how they can be improved, there would be a kind of a brainstorm which would help immensely. And because every member of the team was participating, and the suggestions were taken on board and the recommendations were put out at the end of it, everyone would feel a degree of ownership. And I think it is quite an understandable principle, isn't it? That if you feel that you have participated into decision making and you have taken a decision which is supported, then you feel responsible for it. You do that thing in a much better way than when it is just imposed onto you from the top. Hope you're all with me. Next one, please. Naturally, this was the quality improvement system within our trust. Ours was one of the foremost to bring in that concept. They spent a huge amount, but then equally, every trust would go into that because it was the business model in medicine that was coming in for the first time. That meant that the trusts had to get into their own business of generating funds, generating profits that would benefit the patients, service users, and the staff, all of them. The trusts then would compete with each other in terms of the rates. There was a terse and fierce competition sometimes. There used to be software intelligence, as they would say, that would be collected as to what the other trust is doing. It would be done stealthily in a way, but it was fascinating. The trusts wanted to be profitable, and that's the thing which I think was quite a pleasant surprise. I never believed that a Toyota model, a business model, would be operative and successful in the healthcare system, particularly when it comes to the teams and doctors and nurses managing the patients, because of the fluidity of the mental health problems, fluidity of a human being making good judgments, not so good judgments, etc. So what was the effect? There was pressure to perform right up to a CEO. The trust board could hire a CEO simply because of his track record or her track record of being very good in terms of making money for the trust. Do you see how NHS, which is a system which delivers free healthcare to everyone at the point of contact, how they have gotten into this model now? The management skills and the leadership also are assessed, and people at the top are hired and retained only if they are demonstrably competent. There used to be events where we would look at the statistics. The whole statistics was published all over the trust. And then people would make their own judgments, particularly the trust boards. Next one, please. I hope we have time enough. Can someone remind me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Pardon, sir?
How much time is left so I can pitch it accordingly?
We have enough time, sir.
Okay, thank you. The next important point which every doctor has to undergo is the complaints and serious untoward incident processes. We used to call it as SUIs, meaning where patients would commit suicide, they might commit homicide, they might get into serious medical problems because of the mishaps or mistakes in the system of delivery. Interestingly, when I joined, I'll tell you a small instance without taking much time. But as I said, this is a personal journey. So I should tell you something which was interesting for me. When I joined at the end of the 7th or 8th month or so, my medical director, he met me up somewhere at some event, and he asked me, Vinod, how many complaints have you had against you? Oh my God. I felt so proud in telling him that there was no complaint. Steve, his name was Steve Robbins. And I saw wrinkles on his face. I was wondering as to why. He should also be feeling good about mine not having had any complaint against me. But he said the next statement, which was very sobering. He said, just wait. It will start. So the point I'm trying to make is that there is a culture of complaints, which means, I'm not talking about it negatively. Wherever there is a dissatisfaction, wherever there is a mishap, wherever there is a conflict, the patients and the families, even the team members have a right to make a written complaint to the relevant department. We in our trust, at least, it was called PALS department, PALS, and liaison service. A very innocuous and soft looking name that, but actually any call from PALS department would mean there is a complaint worth taking seriously against you. And complaints I did have, everyone has, because of the imperfectness of everything involved, myself, my team, patients, the system, processes, etc. The interesting thing and the greatest learning experience that one had was because of the processes that followed the SUI or the complaint. The process was called RCA, root cause analysis, where a team of experts who are not related to you by way of being a member of your team or being your friend or being your co-professional or fellow colleague, whatever, they would sit for hours together, go through all the records, interview everyone involved, and come to an analysis, and finally would apportion the responsibility. They don't call it blame culture, but depending upon your personality, you could look at it as a blame that you had as a consultant because you failed in something, you should have done something which you did not do, or you could look at it as a constructive experience because no one punishes you there unless the complaint goes to the court. And courts, of course, you know how the roles are adversarial. You are against someone, someone is against you. You have a lawyer or a solicitor or a barrister who is against the opponents or adversaries, parallel fellow. So I think this gave a really in-depth learning experience in terms of how your work, how your actions, how your behaviors can be seen in a fairly objective third-party viewpoint. done by people who are responsible, mind you, and they're not interested in pulling you down. That's a difficult job. That is indeed a difficult job. As I said, mistakes did happen, faults were highlighted, recommendations were made, and if the patient and the family were not happy about it, they had the freedom to approach the General Medical Council or the courts. This, let me tell you, was the most emotionally distressing circumstance for any doctor, for any team member, to go through that process of inquiry and analysis, which, it was laid threadbare open, even the minutest of the actions, the timelining of every event. On the one hand, I told you that it was a fantastic learning experience, but on the other hand, it would be so emotionally distressing that SUIs would mean almost at times ill health for the doctors involved, particularly if it goes to the General Medical Council. There have been instances where the inquiries would drag on for, let's say, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And even if you have a good outcome in your favor, you are drained out at the end. And that's a story unto itself. And there is a statistic which has been published too. Anyway, so that was the stressful area for everyone. Next one, please. So looking at all this, I'm sure one would feel that if one is to work with so much of constraint, so much of regulation, so much of oversight, so much of compromise in terms of your ego needs, because you are challenged day in and day out by even your team members. Team members are free to express their opinions, even if they are quite contrary or against those of the consultant. And that, I'm sure you will understand, as not a happy situation at all, being challenged day in and day out. Mind you, those are not complaints, but they are part of the culture where there is the freedom of expression, shall I say, or the right to express a concern and lay it down in the record, because all the meetings would be minuted. So that was a fantastic experience too, because there was a lot to learn, because the value of your colleague, no matter if she or he is a psychologist or a pharmacist or an OT or a social worker, they can really contribute in a significant positive manner. It is not that the doctor says and that's the final gospel or the final truth. No way. A doctor can be wrong. Okay. So if this was the work, of work and the attendant stresses, what happens to your life as a human being? Well, there were answers and there were processes for that. The trust by necessity, of necessity, and wanting to be in the limelight, wanting to be in a competitive environment to attract good talent, they would support people like me, who came from an alien culture, who had a very different exposure. They would support your acculturation process. They would have programs for that. They would take into account the work-life balance issues, because every individual is different. Every stressful situation is different for every person. So in effect, I think the trust also had a kind of emotional intelligence of his own, unique, because I think quite a lot depends upon what the culture of the organization is in terms of how they treat you. How do they select you? How do they treat you in terms of respect, in terms of support needed, in terms of growth of your career, in terms of service outcomes, everything. So the supports are there for every situation. But as I said, when the competition is terse and terrific, there could be compromises, as it happens anywhere in the world. I also came across the concepts that the trust was supporting of late, concepts of compassion and happiness psychology. While talking to one of the directors a few years before I left, that is about 2012 or so, he was telling me, we need to be compassionate towards our colleagues. I said that's a heaven-sent thing for all of us, because many times we were quite liberal and free with each other, because whatever the director board decides, whatever the chief exec decides and passes it down as the order or expectation or process, it is felt to be a top-heavy organization where decision making is not entirely in your hands. Even if you are the best doctor in the world, even if you are the most qualified, unless you are the director or you are the CEO yourself. Yeah, doctors also have been CEOs. There was another concept which was prevalent, which I liked, but unfortunately, we couldn't be part of it again because I had to leave. They were called Schwarz rounds. I'm sure many of you may have heard of this. These are the rounds where professionals discuss matters of their own emotions. Might come to you as a surprise. In the professional field, emotions do not have a great role to play except the positive ones or the ones related to motivation and hard work and this, that, and the other. But in terms of sadness, in terms of anger, in terms of frustration, in terms of jealousy, in terms of competition, rivalry, leg pulling, and so on, there is no professional forum where it would happen, except, in my understanding, my limited understanding, I must say, Schwarz rounds. They would meet once in a month. There would be issues around confidentiality and they would be guarded. So one felt safe in airing one's grievances. I think that is a good system, and that could be utilized very fruitfully, so that one's morale remains reasonable, one's low mood spells, which are inevitable, are manageable, and you can remain effective. Next one, please. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation. Questions would be asked. Why did I come back? When my father gave me that dream, well, I must say it was my mother who brought me back. She didn't tell me to come back, leave everything, but it is my emotions. So the emotions literally hijacked the thought process. I'm sure this concept is not new to any one of us. The strong emotions do hijack thinking, don't they? Now, anyone could ask me, if I could get the offer of joining back, which I do have, coming from the topmost directors, would I go back? Very interesting question, very intriguing question, very challenging question, isn't it? Particularly at this age. Anyway, I don't want to stretch this any further. I think I have probably reached the end of the time limit. So any questions, criticism, comment are most welcome. Thank you very much for your patience.
Bhushan sir.
Yes,
Dear everyone, you all can put your questions.
can we start now?
Yes, yes.
Good evening, Dr. Chaugule. That was a fantastic presentation giving a really broad and detailed overview of how one of the most sophisticated and very well-funded mental health system in Western world works. There are quite a few questions that we need to take one by one. One of the first questions by Dr. Prasoon is that psychiatry, we follow start low and go slow, But in acute phase of any mental disorder, we have to use highest doses. What are the guidelines that we will follow, or what are the guidelines that are followed in Western countries or as per our instinct? Are there any guidelines or do we have to follow our instinct?
Good question. And I think there are guidelines because it's a high risk business using high dose antipsychotics or high dose antidepressants and so on and so forth. I think that there are specified guidelines for each trust because each trust have their own protocol to follow. And that protocol is devised by their own experts, which includes the pharmacists, the consultants, and the directors. So yes, there are guidelines which need to be followed. Different complex challenging situations in a patient. Then what happens is that you are expected to exercise your own judgment and justify that judgment. You need to take into account the patient's consent or the family's consent and your team's consent, because untoward incidences could happen in high dosages. We are all aware. So there are these provisions, both for the guidelines and if you want to deviate from the guidelines with justification.
Thank you, sir. There is one more question by Dr. Bhalchandra Kalmek. How much is the healthcare budget for UK?
Oh my God, I think you are asking the right question to a wrong person. As I said, made a reference to the financial situation all over. At the time I left, that was 2.5 years ago. And the situation is evolving and changeable. So I'm sorry, I won't be able to give you any estimate, but certainly it is a percentage of GDP, which is much higher and perhaps at the highest level in the world.
Sir, I took the liberty of quickly Googling it because I had the advantage of having looked at the question beforehand.
Wonderful. You are always helpful, I know.
Thank you, sir. So it looks like UK has a health budget of $220 billion, which is about 11% of their GDP. With our GDP, which is roughly similar to UK, we have our health budget at about $3 billion. If we put together everything, private, state, and central government, we go to about $5 billion. So our 5 billion against their 200 billion, and our population is about 15 times their population. I think that should answer the question quite comprehensively.
Great answer that. Thank you.
Sir, let's move on to the next question. This question is by Dr. Madhumita Bahale. Can you describe one major experience which was totally different than in our country, and which you think must be implemented here to really benefit our patients?
Very good question, but I think it is quite a broad-based question. Let me, if it is to benefit the patients, I suppose two things could be done rather than, I don't think there is a simple answer, but there are multiple threads which I can think of. One is getting a feedback, getting into the habit of getting a feedback from the patients and that is service users and their carers, their relatives. The feedback should be addressing the quality of care in terms of the outcomes they had, the troubles that they had to go through, the expenses, the behavior of the doctors, nurses, etc. I think that is one which shapes the whole quality of the service. That is one. And the second one, I suppose, is the peer group formations, formal kind of peer group formations of, let's say, 5 in a group of consultants who would develop and support each other in terms of developing their own skills, their own knowledge, their own experiences by attending conferences, by attending lectures, by attending programs, wherever they are, and discussing them in terms of reflections and how they would lead to action points. Otherwise, it's very easy to attend a conference, enjoy it, and forget about it. we hardly retain anything unless there is an exceptional one, isn't it? I mean, at least that's what happened in my case. It may not happen with everyone. But yeah, the peer group system for the medics and the feedback system from the service use would be something important.
Thank you, sir. Next question is from, again, Dr. Bhalchandra Kalmek. And this is a Brahmastra, but you are very well geared to face this question. The question is, how much is pharma influence in day-to-day practice in UK?
I can talk only about my trust. I do respect the pharmaceutical industry and pharmaceutical colleagues of ours. They support a lot of academic activity and even research activity in many places. The place where I worked was not liberal in terms of allowing the visits by the pharmaceutical industry into the trust during the working hours. That is one. Second is the pharmacy as a department, who have well qualified scientists, I would say even, or professionals. They would influence the trust policy in relation to the medications by going into the minutest of the details of the medication effects, side effects, etc. I think the context is important here. The way the world has witnessed how medics have been influenced in terms of their prescribing practices. You don't take it wrong, but it has happened. It is quite been well known that a drug trial, the gold standard of RCT, if it is industry sponsored, people take it with a pinch of salt. And the place where I worked was heavily dominated by pharmacy. And they would sometimes even dictate the terms of prescription of medication dosages, or at least criticize. And depending upon how you take it, you implement it or you don't implement it and face the challenges. So yes, there are good points, there are not so good points. And it's always good to be respectful and reciprocating with them, but being mindful of what I always tell our colleagues and students, be mindful of the critical appraisal faculty. We must develop a critical appraisal faculty, each one of us. If we don't, you are a normal human being. You'll be subject to all kinds of influences, biases, and distortions. And I think this would sum up what it was all like.
Thank you, sir. There is one more question. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of the person who has asked this question. It is about postgraduate training and how is our training and their training different. Our training feels more exam oriented rather than patient and skill oriented.
Yeah, that's a good question and that's a correct observation. But I suppose we do have different institutions which will have different practices in absence of any kind of a standard framework for governing the medical education. Although I'm aware the Indian Medical Council will be issuing their own guidelines. But yes, their training is more practice oriented. It is driven by practical needs. It is driven by expense considerations. I remember instances when in our monthly meetings of the trust consultants, there would be an observation which would come up in a rather oblique way. Like I can give you an example, a hypothetical example. The director would say in the meeting, Vinod, it's very interesting to look at the expense from your locality. You seem to be using aripiprazole, which is highly expensive. Do we need to consider the outcomes? Now, so these are the considerations that went into quite prominently. And I think the trainees did learn out of this, that the whatever is given in CTP, whatever is given in Oxford textbook, whatever is given in Stephen Stahl's fantastic books on pharmacology, psychopharmacology. That's not the only thing. Although I believe personally that's crucial for our understanding, I think that education driven by practical needs and in terms of outcomes and practical skills needed is crucial. And there is a lot to learn. There are training events in terms of how to communicate, how to break the bad news, how to face death, how to face critical situations in a consultant's life. So yeah, these are all considerations that we need to take into account when we educate our juniors, because from one's own experience, one is very certain, at least I am very certain, that, and this is a statement which I'm making after having had huge number of discussions with seniors and educational institute chairmen and their boards of governance, etc., that as medical students, there is very little that is taught which goes in the direction of self-management, meaning managing your own emotions, managing difficult patients, managing your own distress or stress. How would you otherwise explain the huge number of problems that medics face while in training and once the training is over, because you are then thrown into the world, out into the open, without being fully equipped emotionally, without being fully equipped in terms of what the guidelines are and what the importance is, and knowing our own limitations. I suppose if the education is less textbook driven, the better it is. But textbooks are nevertheless essential because they give you the depth of understanding. And so, yeah, the training needs to be practice oriented, oriented, and patient and service user and, the carer oriented, because patients also need to be given a choice. And that's not what we learn necessarily from the textbooks. Maybe the current textbooks might give that kind of a facet to the educational and learning process. Hope I've made clear rather than confusing the issue.
Thank you, sir. Can I please request the chairman to give me a time check? How much more time do we have for question and answers?
Yeah, we can take a few questions, sir. 1-2 questions we can take.
Thank you. We have one more question here, which has directly arrived, is that should we copy the British health system model? Is this model relevant for India as well?
Good question. But I think I have been careful enough in not biasing anyone in any direction. I have told you of my own personal journey. The learning points could be many, if you want to call them as learning points, but equally it's a fact of our lives that UK is UK, US is US, and India is India. And we will have our own knowledge base, we'll have our own practices, but the guiding principles, I believe, are very, very crucial. And they need to be emphasized very much in our education. At least, maybe I didn't have that kind of an exposure in my times. Mind you, this is not to blame anyone or any system, but there is a need for this. I agree that we need to be taking these facets into account quite seriously.
Thank you, sir. We have a last question here, that in NHS, psychiatrists see only few patients per week, so waiting period is more. But in India, psychiatrist is easily available to patients. Do you think it is a good thing from patient's point of view?
I think both systems have their own plus points, minus points. If you think of the UK system where the consultant sees less number of patients, well, it is actually the whole team who is seeing the patients. So the whole caseload is distributed. Complex ones going to the consultant and less complex ones to the team. the time that is devoted is required for many things. If you want to take into account all the ethics, all the guidelines, all the rules, regulations, all the laws, legal provisions and supports, you need time. You just cannot let go of those considerations simply because you don't have time. So in that system, in that Zeitgeist, I would say, that is the most appropriate thing to do. Whereas with the kind of population that we have in terms of numbers, in terms of the ratio of the experts in relation to the population, the whole calculation is totally different. But as I said again, the basic principles are the ones which is up to one to see how one can do justice to that whole process. Quite possible, I might take 45 minutes to see a patient, and you being younger and more talented, you might do it in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and spread over a period of time all the important points that need to be considered in delivering the care effectively and satisfactorily too. So yeah, you cannot, that shoe will not fit us, certainly not. But equally, the basics are basics, I suppose. Good things are good things. It's up to us how we develop a team of our own, perhaps, and attempt to deliver whatever we consider is good and whatever our society considers is good. Because I did get that kind of a feedback after coming back here, you know. Obviously, being a product of that environment over a period of time of 14 years, invariably I couldn't let go of those guiding influences. But patients and families do respond. Students also do respond, I believe. You could ask them. The best thing would be, of course, the feedback, unsolicited feedback, anonymized feedback from them. But yes, that's the fact of our lives. We have to contend with.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for patiently answering all the questions. That was the last question I had received on my panel. So I thank you once again and hand over the mic back to the chairperson. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Bhushan. So that was truly an enriching talk, sir. We were really enlightened, sir. Sir talked about how he went at young age of 55 to UK, where he, as per Erickson's stages, had already crossed over the stages of identity and role confusion or intimacy and isolation, and could go into a stage of what is generativity, that is contributing to community and giving to others. His story told us how he smoothly crossed over that bridge of one belief system to another, which he truly called it as Zeitgeist, and while lovingly leaving a round trail of wisdom as he narrated his experience of achievement. He gave positive view of both worlds, independence and experimentation of Indian system, to structure and accountability of Western system, from self-imposed core values to a system-facilitated one, from norm-based to a criteria-based, and with an open 360-degree feedback loop in the system. He found the goal of the organization was well aligned with the growth of each individual, motivated with incentives and well assessed for outcomes. He found that hierarchy was defined by competencies they had and not the qualities or the degrees they held. It was truly a democratic system or process which he saw, and he found it to be worthy enough. He became conscious of what was missed out unknowingly before, like human right violation, quality improvement, customer satisfaction, and ownership. He found there that Toyota model was not only, did not make only quality car, but also made quality care in psychiatry. Pals were not that kind of pals. He found out they were not friendly, but finally their intervention made you more user-friendly. While his father sent him farther, his mother pulled him back to the motherland. a real wonderful journey, sir, which was filled with excitement. We are truly grateful for educating while you narrated the story throughout. Thanks a lot, sir. With this, I'll hand over to Dr. Dhananjay Neil for the further proceedings.
Thank you very much for your generosity.
It was really a wonderful academic session. Dr. Vinod Chaugule has done a magnificent job in this session. He has floated us in the sea of knowledge from east as well as west. This will help us to know more about patients and their psychological problems all around the world. Thank you, sir, once again for your wonderful session. I thank Dr. JYOTI PRAKASH and Dr. Bhushan Shukla for moderating the session. I thank all the senior psychiatrists, colleagues, friends along with the psychologists for attending this session to make it a huge success. I thank Mr. Anirhan Mitra, Mr. Mahesh Apar, Ms. Shruti Shettigar, Mr. Anupam Biswas, Mr. Bilal Shishgar, and the entire team of Center for being the academic partner and for arranging this in a professional way. Thank you all once again. Stay safe, stay healthy. We will be conducting more such sessions routinely on behalf of PPA and IPS branch Pune. See you soon in the next session. Over to Shruti ma'am for closing remarks.
Thank you, sir. So first of all, I would like to thank IPS Pune branch and PPA for once again showing the faith in us and giving Centaur Pharma this opportunity to host such huge stalwarts of psychiatry world. Next, I would like to thank our speaker for the evening, that is Dr. Chaugule sir, for such a lucid and intriguing session. It was a beautiful timeline of a healer, his journey throughout the West, and how he was, brought back, how his heart pulled him back to his land again. And I would like to thank Dr. Professor JYOTI PRAKASH sir, Dr. Karmik sir, and also Dr. Bhushan Shukla sir for ensuring the smooth flow of our today's event. I would also like to thank all the medical fraternity and all the participants who are present here today for your presence. I hope that this expert talk session would give you lots of learnings and it will be helpful in all your future endeavors. Our team at Centaur here will always be your trusted scientific partner and keep bringing such amazing programs even in future too. And please keep providing us the support, prescription support, because Centaur, as you know, is India's #1 psychotropic API manufacturer and second largest in the world, which brings Esentopam, which is of export quality escitalopram 510-20 mg tablets to bring back the essence of life in all your depressed patients. And we also have Esentopam Plus, which is escitalopram 10 mg plus clonazepam 0.5 mg tablets. So thank you once again for everyone attending this beautiful session. And this is Shruti Shettigar from marketing team of Centaur Pharmaceuticals signing off for tonight. And take care, everyone, and of yourself as well as your loved ones, because you matter. So wishing everyone a very good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.